Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. It's Monday, July 14th, 2014, and here are our top stories.
Tonight, a former Al-Qaeda head says ISIS works for the CIA. Then, report, immigrating children are found dead in the Rio Grande. And DARPA wants to know what's on and in your mind. That's next on the InfoWars Nightly News.
I would talk about DARPA and brain chips 15 years ago, and they would have major publications say I was a barking at the moon lunatic.
We're told as the border is collapsing that we need to do it for the children. Now, of course, we're supposed to feel sympathy for them, and it is a real humanitarian crisis, but it is a manufactured crisis. And of course, the media and the president doesn't want us to look too closely. Take a look at this story that was up on Drudge Report today. Small, lifeless, dead children found washed up along the riverbank of the Rio Grande. Now, the interesting thing about this story, because we all know that this is happening, this is one of the first times that it's been reported, but the interesting thing is how this was buried. And this was picked up by the Gateway Pundit from a Fox News report. And as I say, this was something that was at the very end of the article, kind of as an aside. They first started talking about the children coming across, and if you look at the picture on the article, you'll see some women carrying small children across with them, because, of course, it's not true that these unaccompanied minors, these unaccompanied children, as they're now calling them, are truly unaccompanied. The question is, who's bringing them here and under what circumstances? Now, as I reported originally in the Fox News story, they said at first they were mostly teenagers, ages 14 through 17, arriving with their mother or brothers or no one at all. And then came the pregnant women, a mother nursing her infant, a small girl with wide eyes clutching a doll. And then out at the very bottom, they say, many don't make it across the river. Multiple sources became emotional when recounting their discoveries of small, lifeless bodies washed up alongside the riverbank. Now, is that compassion? Are we even being told the right story? If we look at other mainstream media reports, we see that same narrative, that it's these children who are making this journey. The New York Times put it this way. They said, fleeing gangs, children head to the U.S. border. And that's important where they put that comma. It's not that gangs are fleeing to the U.S. border, but they say the children are fleeing to the U.S. border. They say that the U.S. immigration policy offers preferential treatment to minors, and of course that is part of it. Then look at this story from the Wall Street Journal. Few children are deported, and they say in there, here's their narrative. Thousands of children from Central America are undertaking a perilous journey to the U.S., despite warnings from the U.S. that they'll be sent back. In fact, many will get to stay. Now, apart from the fact that the children are staying, look at the way they put this. They say thousands of children aren't listening to warnings. Instead, they decide to make the journey to the United States. That's a journey of about 1,500 miles over a couple of different countries. It would take 35 hours to drive it by car, but of course, these children are not driving cars. How are they navigating their way across a continent? Here's how Glenn Beck put it.
Problem that is staring us in the face. The literal thousands of children that are attempting to navigate the treacherous terrain from Central America to the United States.
Now, that, of course, was from his broadcast less than a week ago. And the article that he put up on the Blaze, the title was, "We Must Open Our Hearts." And the quote is, "Through no fault of their own, they're caught in the political crossfire," Beck said, "of the children." You see, they were first undocumented minors, and now they're unaccompanied children. These are children who, in Beck's words, are navigating the treacherous terrain from Central America to the U.S. Now, if they're really children, they're not able to do that. They can't get that 1,500 miles, that 35 plus hours if they were to drive it by car. If you go back and look at that picture that we had before of the mothers carrying kids across, that is probably the best case scenario of a lot of bad possibilities. In that situation, the kids are not unaccompanied rather, they're accompanied by family members. They're accompanied by a mother or father or the entire family, using those children as an anchor to get onto the welfare state here. Now, of course, welfare isn't going to lift them out of poverty any more than it would in their country. And it's going to do the same thing to our country that it did to Venezuela. Of course, socialism didn't work there. Hugo Chavez gave a 700% return to the bankers. They famously said his interests perfectly aligned with ours. And a year after he died, they were still talking about, we had a quote from a Barclays executive, we've shown this many times on this show, saying that essentially they're going to take care of their sovereign debt first. In other words, they're going to take care of the bankers first. And that article came up because the people in Venezuela were fleeing because they couldn't get food, water, medicine. That's what's driving them here is socialism. And once they get here, what are they going to get? More of the same. Foreign aid does not work, whether it's done in that country or in this country. When they give them foreign aid in another country, it typically doesn't get through the corrupt bureaucracy and the politicians. And that's by design, of course. The same thing is going to happen in our country. That's why the war on poverty hasn't worked. But let's take a look at this issue of whether or not they're children. By NPR's own statistics, they're saying that the number of children who have come across has doubled in the last year. It's 10 times what it was 5 years ago. But if you look at the absolute numbers from their estimates, and of course, they're only estimates because we don't know how many people are getting across that aren't even being intercepted. And of course, if they are being intercepted, we have no way of knowing that we're being told the truth by the government because they keep everything so secret. But let's just go with their numbers. The numbers that they're giving us for the number of children who have come across, even though it's double last year, 10 times 5 years ago, that's still about the number that they estimate are coming across each month. So that's about 1/12 or about 8%, 8 to 10%. And yet the image that's being projected by everyone, and this is what Glenn Beck is jumping in on, the image is that this is a massive exodus of children who are coming across of their own volition and transiting the transcontinental dangers that are coming across there. That would be bad enough if that were the case. It would be bad enough if they were parents who are recklessly endangering their children. And we had Obama encouraging that with his policy, and people like Glenn Beck, the Wall Street Journal, and New York Times encouraging it to remain the same way by putting forth this phony narrative. But there's another, even worse case scenario, and that is a lot of these people coming across are gang members. As we've reported at Infowars.com, many of them have been identified as MS-13 gang members. These are transnational gangs. In other words, they're not limited to just one country. Think of them as the gangster equivalent of multinational corporations. And of course, they're moving here. Now, look at this story that's coming from HispanicallySpeakingNews.com. It's a Latino daily news program. They're pointing out what's going on with baby Zetas. We've got MS-13 gang members who are underage. And of course, we've also got the baby Zetas. These are two children who led a cell of the criminal group Los Zetas, caught holding 8 videos showing how the Zetas butchered victims of abductions even after they had paid the ransom. Now, they're going out and kidnapping people, taking video of them, and then taking video as they mutilate and execute these people. And the kids that are leading this, one of them is 16 years old, and his girlfriend, who is 13 years old. These are the kinds of unaccompanied minors who are also coming into the country. Remember I talked about that New York Times headline, fleeing gangs and children coming to the U.S.? It is fleeing gang members who are coming in. But maybe the worst case scenario are these gang members who may be abducting children as they do adults. Just like they did the baby Zetas here, they're also abducting children, holding them for ransom. We've also reported on that story where they had some of the children that they had kidnapped, they forced them to cut off fingers of the other children, telling them they would execute them if they didn't cut off the fingers. How do we know that these children that are coming across are being accompanied by their parents? Or are they being trafficked by these drug members? Are they being brought in as part of a human trafficking organization? We've seen that these organizations, these multinational drug gangs, have started out as part of the war on drugs. Of course, that was our gift to Central and Latin America, was the war on drugs. Now they have diversified into other businesses, sex trafficking, also human organ trafficking. That's why Jim Bridenstine was trying to find out what was going on at the detention center. But of course, a U.S. congressman like him could not see the children. I'm sure that Glenn Beck won't have a problem like that once he gets there. We've been threatened with arrest when we go and report on this, but of course, Univision is given access. If you will feed out the phony narrative that Obama is trying to put out about this crisis that he manufactured, then you get access. Otherwise, you don't. Take a look at what this Democrat, though, wants to do to correct the situation. We have a Texas congressman who wants to process the illegals in Central America. See, if it's too dangerous for them to make that journey, we can just go there and pick them up. Their free ride on the American taxpayer can start with a free ride on an airplane ticket. Now, if you think that's crazy, Listen to Glenn Beck.
The best way to secure our borders and make America a safe place is to make it accessible to all those fleeing poverty and oppression.
So while the Democrat congressman says, why not have the State Department and DHS down in those countries processing potential refugees and applicants for asylum on the ground so they don't have to go through Mexico, you've got Glenn Beck saying that the way that we make the U.S. secure is by making it accessible to all who are fleeing poverty or violence. Really? Can we really do that? Is that really possible? Can we take on everyone in the world and put them on the shoulders of the American taxpayer? Do you see a problem with that? It's just like trying to adopt all the kids that you see. Of course, Nancy Pelosi said she would love to bring every one of them home. She didn't take a single one of them home. And of course, she couldn't take them all home because she couldn't afford to, even with all the money she's made in Congress on insider trading. But we can't afford to do that as a people either. Now, notice that Glenn Beck is saying that this is an emergency. This is a humanitarian crisis. But he wasn't going to go down to the border for 2 weeks. And when he was going to go to the border, he was going to give 2 meals, some teddy bears, and some soccer balls. And then the rest of it is going to be left as an exercise for you, the American taxpayer, to take care of the people who are brought in. Now, of course, Glenn Beck, when he says we must open our hearts, the implication is that if you don't open your heart, then you're cold-hearted and unchristian. But what did Jesus say about helping the poor? Listen to what he had to say. He said, whenever you give to the poor, don't sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do, and on the streets. He says to be applauded by people. I assure you they've got their reward. Well, what is Glenn Beck's reward? Well, by sounding the trumpet 2 weeks before he's going to go down and give a couple of meals and some toys to people that he thinks he's going to find at the border. And of course, his reward is to get accolades from people like Joe Scarborough, who says he's a real Christian, he's Christ-like. Implication being is that if you don't think that we can take everyone in, then you're very unchristian. But what Jesus said was, when you give to people, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. If he really wanted to help people, he could do it privately. He could adopt. He could do a number of things, but he's blowing his horn here 2 weeks before he goes, saying that it's an emergency, that we all need to go in and participate with that. See, there's a difference between charity and a welfare state. There's a difference between making someone better and making yourself look good. And I think that's what's going on here. I speak out about this because of what happened at the Bundy Ranch. I have seen Glenn Beck come to the aid of Harry Reid and Obama now 2 times in just a couple of months, and I find it disgusting. The lies that he told about the people that were there at the Bundy Ranch and the way he put out the talking points of Harry Reid, tried to paint Mr. Bundy as a sovereign citizen, which is the same as labeling him a domestic terrorist in the eyes of law enforcement, preceding the same types of tactics done by Harry Reid. He is putting out their talking points and doing it for them.
It's easy to say conspiracy theory. The United States government, Barack Obama is going down there and he's driving them from El Salvador to our southern border, and then he's flying to Washington during the day. It's easy to play the conspiracy game.
See, he throws those kind of phony straw man arguments out there. Now, he does, in that same video where he talks about how he's going to go give out teddy bears, he does talk about the U.S.'s involvement in a Honduras coup, but he also ignores the war on drugs, which is the source of the violence in those countries. He ignores the fact that American bankers, multinational bankers, have crushed those countries with debt in order to create a welfare state, which they're going to do both of those things here in spades. And then he also ignores NAFTA. Now, look at this story today from WND. Dr. Jerome Corsi writes about Mexicans blaming Americans for the famous death train. As Dr. Corsi points out, the 2005 KCS acquisition of the Mexican Railroad occurred under the broad canopy of the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America, first announced by President George W. Bush in a meeting with the President of Mexico and the Prime Minister of Canada in Waco, Texas, March 23, 2005. So in a way, we don't really need to send the American government down there because we now have a NAFTA train company that is actually bringing the kids in, but it's not working out too well for them, and it's not going to work out too well for them and for us Once they get here, once the multinational gangs start having gang fights in the universities where these young children are going to be able to get free rides, are going to be able to get in-state tuition at the very least in the universities, it'll be a great place for them to accelerate the turf war between drug companies. And how's that working out in Chicago? Inner-city black residents are saying Obama is the worst president ever. Why are they saying that? Well, they say that because he's not doing anything to help them. As a matter of fact, in Chicago, just in the first 2 weeks of July, they've had 120 people shot, 26 killed so far. And of course, as we've been told many times by a former prosecutor in Chicago with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, 80% of the shootings in Chicago are drug-related. Expect to see this kind of violence throughout America, especially if they can get gun control enacted.
The globalists have controlled the mainstream media for a long time, but now they're expanding, making the weaponization even more vicious and deceptive. All the major networks are state-run.
We are partnering this year with the NFL.
The NFL has become a political weapon against the Second Amendment and pushes Obamacare. MSNBC tells us that our children belong to the state.
We have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities.
The brainwashing media machine has been turned up on high, and it's time for humanity to double down on the true people's media and strike back against the tyrants that are destroying our civilization with their lies and fraud. We are the resistance. You are the resistance. You are the info war. It is more important than ever to realize that we are not the alternative media. We are the true media. The establishment dinosaur press is dying.
We are in an information war, and we are losing that war.
Join us at InfoWarsNews.com and PrisonPlanet.tv. Members can share their memberships with up to 11 people. By subscribing, you will literally be buying war bonds in the info war to expand our operation in the face of the tyrants. Join us at PrisonPlanet.tv.